I'm Madeline Grant, 34, a real estate agent in Portland, Oregon. I've spent over a decade helping families find places to grow old in, raise children in, dream in, and for 5 straight years, I paid the mortgage on the house I grew up in, quietly, consistently, so my parents wouldn't lose it when things got hard. I believed I was preserving our family's legacy. I believed I was investing in my own inheritance. Then came my sister Lillian's wedding, just as the champagne was being poured and guests were settling in. My father stood to make a toast. He smiled at the room, then turned to the bride and groom with tears in his eyes, and he announced that he and my mother were giving Lillian and her new husband the family home, the very house I had been paying for, as a wedding gift. I sat frozen. My champagne glass trembled in my hand, and in that moment, something inside me broke. Before I take you through how I uncovered the months of silence, the legal transfers, and the betrayal buried beneath their smiles, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt like your loyalty or generosity was taken for granted by the very people who should have protected you, drop a like and subscribe. I grew up in the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon, on a tree-lined street where every house had a manicured lawn, a mailbox with peeling numbers, and a porch swing that creaked in summer. Our house on Hawthorne Lane wasn't big, but it was where birthdays were celebrated with cake from the corner bakery, where the living room smelled like lemon polish and my mother's Sunday roast, and where, for a long time, I believed everything was exactly as it should be. My parents, Douglas and Karen Grant, were the kind of people who believed in order. My father worked in accounting for a commercial supply chain company, methodical, quiet, always home by 6. My mother taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, known for her cursive handwriting and her uncanny ability to settle a classroom with a single look. From the outside, we were stable, predictable, the kind of family that posed for Christmas cards in matching sweaters without irony. Then came Lillian. I was 5 when she was born, old enough to remember the silence before her, and how quickly it vanished. She arrived like a holiday parade, all soft pastels and baby powder, with my mother humming lullabies under her breath and my father installing a mobile of stars above her crib. I didn't resent her at first. She was beautiful, delicate. I was the big sister, expected to help, and I did. But the differences began early, subtle at first. On my 10th birthday, I had asked for a sleepover party, nothing extravagant, just pizza and movies and a few friends in pajamas. But 2 days before, my mother sat me down and said we'd need to scale back. Parties get expensive, she'd explained, folding laundry without looking up. You understand. Right, I nodded. Because I always did. That Saturday, it was just 2 girls, 1 pizza, and a homemade cake. 3 months later, when Lillian turned 5, the backyard was transformed. There was a bounce house, a face painter, 20 squealing kindergartners running wild. I remember sitting on the porch, watching it all unfold, thinking maybe we were just in a better financial place. That's what I told myself. That's what I kept telling myself. But it kept happening. When I needed braces, I was told to wait a year. Insurance would cover more later, my parents said. Lillian got hers the month she was diagnosed with crowding. When I turned 16, my gift was a series of driving lessons. When Lillian turned 16, she got a used Honda Civic with a red bow on the hood. The explanations were always there, rehearsed like lines in a play. The timing worked out better for her. We're in a more comfortable place financially now, or the one I heard most. Your sister just needs a little more support than you do. You're so independent. But that independence, it wasn't innate. It wasn't something I was born with. It was something I learned, because I had to. I started babysitting at 14, pushing carts at the grocery store by 16, and clocked nearly full-time hours during every college break. I bought my own prom dress, applied for my own scholarships, paid for my own textbooks. Meanwhile, Lillian's only job was to keep her grades decent, which she did, barely. I never threw it in their faces. I didn't rebel, didn't lash out, I just absorbed it. Swallowed the lump in my throat every time my mother brushed Lillian's hair and called her my little light. Every time my father bragged about her latest art project, but forgot I'd just made honor roll again. I let it pass. Because what else do you do when the people you love seem to love someone else just a little more? You adapt, You survive. And then, one day, you start building a life where you're not waiting for someone to notice you. You make yourself impossible to ignore. By the time I turned 18, I understood something that most people don't fully realize until much later in life. If I wanted stability, I'd have to create it myself. There would be no safety net waiting for me if I stumbled. No quiet bank transfer from my parents to cover a shortfall in tuition or rent. For some, independence is a milestone. For me, it was a default setting. I enrolled at Portland State University with a partial scholarship and a major in business. My concentration was real estate development, an industry that fascinated me for its blend of structure and intuition. The ability to look at a forgotten building or an empty lot and see possibility that felt powerful. But timing, as it turned out, was not on my side. I graduated in 2008. The housing market had just collapsed. Homes that had once sold in bidding wars were now sitting vacant. Developers were hemorrhaging cash. Brokers were leaving the business in waves. And there I was, 22, newly licensed, and holding a degree that many people said wouldn't be worth the paper it was printed on. Most of my classmates gave up, switched paths, moved back home. I didn't have that option. The lease on my studio apartment was mine alone, and the second-hand furniture I'd collected from thrift stores and Craigslist had already been paid for with shifts at the bookstore and the coffee shop. There was no room to quit, so I didn't. Instead, I took a job as an administrative assistant at a struggling real estate agency on the east side of Portland. The office was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a failing flower shop, with flickering lights and coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. My desk was wedged beside the copier, and my days were filled with cold calls, appointment reminders, and filing cabinets that stuck. At night, I studied, memorized zoning codes, shadowed senior agents, drove through neighborhoods I couldn't afford to live in, and took notes on architecture, price trends, even how people landscaped their yards. I worked every angle I could find, even when the returns felt microscopic. The first year, I made 2 sales. One was a fixer-upper to a recently divorced schoolteacher. The other was a bank-owned foreclosure bought by a couple with a baby on the way. After taxes, commissions, and expenses, I cleared just enough to scrape by. I ate ramen 5 nights a week, took the bus when my car broke down, and called my parents only when I had good news. Which wasn't often. They weren't cruel about it, just disinterested. My mother asked about that job thing occasionally, and my father's contribution was always the same. Have you considered something more stable, as if I hadn't thought of that every day? But I kept showing up. I kept learning, kept improving, kept putting in the hours when no one else would. And in my 3rd year, something shifted. I got a call from a client who'd been referred by a friend of a friend, an older woman looking to downsize from her lakefront property after the death of her husband. She was kind, detail-oriented, and deeply loyal. I treated her with the patience and care I wished someone had once offered me. She told her friends about me. Then they told theirs. One deal led to another. First modest townhouses, then single-family homes in desirable neighborhoods, and eventually, high-end condos with panoramic views of the city. I didn't rush it. I didn't need flash. I just needed consistency. And slowly, it came. By the time I turned 28, I'd closed over 40 transactions. I moved out of my cramped studio into a warm, light-filled condo in the Pearl District. I leased a reliable car. My wardrobe no longer came from clearance racks or consignment shops. My name started showing up in brokerage newsletters. People asked me for advice. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was earning my place. Still, I never bragged. Success, for me, wasn't loud. It was quiet. An uncluttered bank account, an inbox full of referrals, a weekend with no client emergencies. I never flaunted it to my family. In fact, I rarely mentioned it at all, because part of me still hoped that if I stayed steady enough, good enough, visible enough, maybe they'd finally see me. They didn't. But I had built something no one could take away. And that, I learned, was more powerful than their approval ever could be. Success didn't arrive with confetti. There was no single moment of triumph, no grand celebration. Just quiet stability, the kind I had worked for, the kind I had longed for since I was old enough to notice what I wasn't being given. I had built a life I could depend on. I thought that would be enough. Then the call came. It was a Tuesday evening, sometime after dinner. I still remember the way my father's voice sounded over the phone. Tight, low, almost apologetic. He never used to call during the week. That alone told me something was wrong. "Madeline," he said, clearing his throat. "I didn't want to worry you, but I was let go, downsizing, after 30 years. I froze. My father had worked as a senior financial analyst for a logistics company since before I could ride a bike. He wore the same pressed button-downs every day, packed his lunch in the same navy cooler, reliable, predictable. Suddenly, gone. They gave me a severance, he added quickly. Enough for 6 months, maybe a bit more. We'll manage. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Okay, thanks for telling me. That same week, my mother's doctor diagnosed her with rheumatoid arthritis. The flare-ups came fast and cruel, her knuckles swollen, her steps slower, her breath catching on cold mornings. Her school district insurance covered part of the treatment, but not the expensive injections her doctor now recommended. "We're figuring it out," she told me during one of our weekly Sunday calls, her voice bright but tired. "It's just a bump in the road." But when I visited a month later, the truth sat in plain sight. Past due notices tucked beneath junk mail on the kitchen counter. A final warning envelope from the utility company partially hidden under a gardening magazine. When I asked about it, my mother busied herself pointing out new blooms in the backyard. My father stared at the television and said it was temporary. But I knew better. That night, I sat awake in my condo, staring at the ceiling fan as it rotated in slow, patient circles. I thought about the house on Hawthorne Lane, the living room where I'd once played piano, the creaky step on the staircase, the smell of cinnamon rolls on Saturday mornings. It wasn't extravagant, but it was theirs, and it held pieces of me, too. By morning, I had made a decision. I called them after work, calm, measured. "Let me help," I said. "I can cover the mortgage until things settle, and I'll take care of any medical expenses your insurance doesn't cover." At first, there was silence. Then my mother's voice broke. "Are you sure? Sweetheart, that's a lot. We didn't want to burden you." "You're not a burden," I told her. And I meant it. When I logged in that night to set up the monthly transfer, I didn't think about the long term. I didn't run projections or calculate what I'd be giving up. I just did it, because I could. And because, for once, I wanted them to feel safe. "We'll pay you back," my father said quietly during my next visit, placing a hand on my shoulder. "This is still your inheritance someday. You know, the house will be yours." My mother nodded, wiping tears. "We'll never forget this, Madeline." And I believed them. Month after month, I sent the payments. I covered the mortgage, then utilities. When the roof started leaking, I paid for repairs. I added groceries to my Costco runs, filled prescriptions on their behalf, drove them to doctor's appointments on my days off. No one else offered. Lillian, still floating between passion projects, dropped by on occasion, bringing candles from weekend markets, talking about yoga retreats and the latest healing modalities she was exploring. She never asked about the bills, never once offered to help. But I didn't complain, because I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it because someone had to, and because, despite everything, I still loved that house. I still believed it would be mine someday. That belief gave me comfort. And that comfort, in time, would become the deepest betrayal I'd ever known. The arrangement was never meant to be permanent. That's what I reminded myself each month as I transferred another mortgage payment, covered another round of injections, picked up another utility bill. It was temporary, a bridge, my parents had said, until things got better. But as the months blurred into years, I stopped waiting for the turn. My father found part-time consulting work, just enough to stay busy, not enough to offset the weight of their expenses. My mother reduced her teaching hours due to her health, and I adjusted. Quietly, I budgeted, deferred the down payment on a second property, passed on a few investment opportunities. It was manageable, I told myself. It was family. Then Lillian met Spencer. She'd been teaching yoga part-time at an upscale studio near the waterfront. barely enough to live on. But somehow she always managed to brunch, travel, and curate a wardrobe more fitting for an influencer than an underemployed 20-something. I never asked how, I already knew. She met Spencer at a charity gala she'd attended with one of her private clients. He was charming in that polished, practiced way, wealthy, confident, the son of a family who owned a chain of high-end car dealerships across the Pacific Northwest. They clicked instantly. Their relationship moved fast, within months. My parents were gushing about him, his manners, his generosity, his family's connections. Lillian flooded her social media with filtered snapshots of champagne toasts, mountain getaways, and courtside seats at Trailblazers games. And my parents, they came alive in ways I hadn't seen in years. My mother suddenly had the energy for long shopping trips and late-night phone calls with Lillian about wedding colors. My father, who hadn't attended a social gathering in over a year, eagerly hosted dinner for Spencer twice in 1 month. Even the guest room was repainted. The same room I'd helped patch and paint the previous winter now had fresh linens and a vase of lilies on the nightstand. They didn't say it out loud, but I saw it clearly. The house was no longer just theirs. It was part of a new performance, a setting piece for something bigger. Then came the engagement. Spencer proposed with a ring that glimmered like a full mortgage payment. My mother called me breathless, part joy, part strategy. It's going to be a beautiful wedding. Madeline, just beautiful. They're already looking at venues. I'm happy for her, I said. And I meant it. Or at least, I tried to. 2 weeks after the engagement party, held, of course, at the Langford family's country club, my father called with a familiar tone, soft, apologetic. Madeline, the roof's showing some wear again. We've got a contractor coming to take a look. Might need to act before the rain picks up this fall. I didn't question it. I transferred an extra $2,000 that evening, but something didn't sit right. The following weekend, I stopped by unannounced to drop off a care package. No tarp, no ladders, no contractor van in the driveway. Inside, my mother and Lillian were surrounded by open wedding magazines, swatches of fabric, and a half-empty bottle of champagne. When I asked casually about the roof, my mother laughed lightly, brushing the question aside. Oh, we're just getting some estimates. Nothing urgent. You wouldn't believe how expensive these caterers are. Though, she realized too late what she'd revealed. I glanced down at the papers spread across the coffee table. A caterer's quote. More than I'd spent furnishing my entire condo. I asked nothing more, because asking would require confrontation. And confrontation, in our family, had always been dressed up as misunderstanding. But that night, I lay awake with the creeping realization that the lines between what I was giving and what they were using had begun to blur. And worse, somewhere in their minds, they had stopped seeing the difference. After that afternoon with the champagne and the wedding magazines, I started noticing the shift more clearly, not in arguments or accusations, but in absence. I wasn't asked to join venue tours. I didn't get copied on planning emails. I heard about Lillian's bridal shower through a mutual friend's Instagram story. Photos of rose-colored cocktails and a floral backdrop with cursive letters spelling out future Mrs. Langford. My name was never mentioned. When I gently asked my mother why I hadn't been included, she smiled with practiced ease. You're always so busy, sweetheart. We didn't want to burden you. Her voice held a familiar softness, one that used to soothe me when I was younger, before I understood how it could be used to exclude without raising suspicion. I told myself it didn't matter, that weddings were chaotic, and details slipped through cracks. I still paid the mortgage, still dropped off prescriptions, still transferred funds for the electric bill, which they claimed had spiked due to summer heat, every month, like clockwork, quiet, reliable, invisible. The wedding arrived on a Saturday in June, bright, cloudless, unbearably perfect. It was held at the Wisteria Ballroom inside the historic Alderwood Hotel in downtown Portland, a place with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and rental rates high enough to make even seasoned planners flinch. I arrived at dawn, as bridesmaids were being ushered into hair and makeup. I was one of them, of course, included just enough to be useful. Not enough to be heard. Throughout the morning, I fetched shawls, calmed tempers, Found a bottle of champagne with a colder chill. Lillian had a meltdown when the roses arrived. Cream instead of ivory, she whispered furiously. My mother pulled me aside, placing both hands on my arms. Please help make this day perfect for your sister, she said. It's the most important day of her life. And so, I did. I found the florist. I negotiated replacements. I even stood in for the missing event coordinator when the seating chart was misprinted. All while mentally calculating the cost of each floral arrangement, the imported silk napkins, the custom lighting installation over the dance floor. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just watching. The ceremony itself was stunning. Lillian looked radiant, Spencer confident and collected. My mother dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father beamed like a man who had won something. I watched from my aisle seat, clapping when expected, smiling for photos, sipping champagne slowly enough to keep the bubbles from rising into my throat. And then, after dinner, after cake, after the toasts and the string quartet, my father stood up, glass in hand. He tapped it lightly with his fork. The room quieted. I'd like to say a few words, he began. His voice, warm with emotion, echoed softly across the room. Watching Lillian grow into the remarkable woman she is today has been one of the greatest joys of our lives, and now, as she and Spencer begin their own journey, Karen and I wanted to give them something meaningful, something they can build their future on. He paused, looking toward my mother, who smiled and nodded. And so, he continued, we are gifting them our home, the house on Hawthorne Lane, the place where we've made so many memories, where love has always lived. We hope it will now become their first family home. Applause erupted. People turned to each other, whispering about such a generous, touching gift. Lillian's hands flew to her mouth in shock. Spencer pulled her in with a grin. My mother wept openly. I sat frozen. The champagne flute trembled slightly in my hand. My heart pounded so loud it blurred the sounds around me. I heard nothing, except the quiet click of something locking inside me. 5 years. 5 years of mortgage payments, utility bills, property taxes, emergency repairs, grocery runs, medical costs. 5 years of being the safety net no one saw. And now, in front of 200 guests, the house had been given away, without a single word to me, not even a thank you. I held my smile through the rest of the night. I hugged Lillian when she cried into my shoulder about how unexpected and beautiful the gift was. I posed for family photos beneath chandeliers I hadn't paid for, but might as well have. I toasted their future. And when the music began and attention drifted elsewhere, I slipped quietly through a side door. I didn't go home. I drove straight to Hawthorne Lane. The house was dark when I arrived, every window familiar, every brick carrying the weight of what I thought we'd agreed on. It was no longer mine to believe in. But that night, I finally saw the truth. I hadn't just been excluded, I had been erased. The house looked exactly the same. Porch lights still on, curtains drawn just the way my mother liked them at night. Neat, centered, not a sliver of glass exposed. But everything felt different now. As I sat parked in the driveway, the reality of what had just happened wrapped itself around me like a cold fog. They had given away the house. And they had done it publicly, joyfully, without hesitation, without me. They arrived just after midnight, still in their formal wear. My mother's lipstick faded at the edges. My father's bow tie slightly loosened. They looked startled to see my car, then weary as they stepped out. Madeline, my mother called, clutching her clutch like a shield. Why aren't you at the reception? I didn't answer. Just said, quietly, we need to talk. Then walked inside, expecting them to follow. They did. We sat in the living room, still decorated with framed engagement photos and congratulatory cards. I didn't waste time. How could you give away the house I've been paying for without even telling me? My father sighed, settling into his chair. It's our house. Madeline, we appreciated your help during a rough time. But ultimately, the deed was in our name, and my name was on every check I wrote for 5 years. I replied, voice steady, on the receipts for the roof, for the new water heater, the insurance premiums. You told me I was investing in my future. My mother's voice sharpened. Not cruel, but detached. You chose to help. Sweetheart, we never forced you. You were in a position to assist, and you did. That doesn't mean you're owed something in return. Something in me broke a little, not because of the money, not even because of the house, but because I realized, fully and without denial, that they had never seen me as part of the future they were protecting, only as the foundation they could quietly build it on. You said it would be mine someday, I whispered. You said this was still my inheritance. Plans change, my father muttered, not meeting my eyes. Lillian and Spencer need a home to start their life. They can't afford something comparable on their own. And I asked, voice rising just slightly. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed these last 5 years? I've delayed buying property, cut back on retirement contributions, turned down opportunities, because I was supporting this house, supporting you. You're already established, my mother replied calmly. You have your condo, your career. Lillian needs this more. There it was, not even hidden anymore. The quiet assumption that my success made me less worthy of care, of consideration, that because I'd managed to survive without them, I didn't deserve to be protected by them. I stood, my purse already in hand. I won't be supporting anyone in this family anymore. My father shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. Madeline, don't make this dramatic. This isn't dramatic, I said. It's overdue. They didn't try to stop me as I walked out the door. Maybe they thought I'd cool off. Maybe they assumed I'd come around, like I always had. But as I stepped into the night, the truth settled heavy in my chest. I had never been the daughter they defended, prioritized, or even truly saw. I was the daughter who fixed things, the one who didn't ask for much, the one who gave, quietly, consistently, until there was nothing left to give. And now, for the first time, I was done. The days that followed were a blur of work appointments, unread messages, and a silence I had long craved, but not like this. My phone rang with familiar names: Mom, then Dad, then just voicemails. Some sounded concerned, others annoyed. Melissa sent a text, thanking me for being part of her special day, with no mention of the house, or of what had unraveled after the cake was cut. I responded to none of them. Instead, I did what I had always done when things felt out of control. I worked. I filled my schedule until there wasn't room to feel. Back-to-back showings, open houses, contracts to review. I told myself it was temporary, that eventually the sting would dull. But it didn't. It sharpened. Each property I walked through reminded me of the one I had believed I was investing in. Every fireplace, every updated kitchen, every slate roof brought a flash of the home on Hawthorne Lane, and the thousands I had poured into it, quietly, without recognition, without terms. That silence had become the problem. So one night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and pulled up my financial records. Month by month, I built a spreadsheet: mortgage payments, insurance, medical expenses, utility bills, repairs, prescriptions, groceries, roof replacement, winter heating. I didn't guess. I had receipts for all of it. The final total, $165,472. I stared at the number until the screen blurred. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Samantha Ford, a financial advisor recommended by a colleague. She reviewed the documentation with polite professionalism, her pen tapping softly against the edge of the folder. Was there ever anything in writing, she asked? No, I said. It was all verbal, but they told me, more than once, that the house would be mine one day, that I was investing in my future. She nodded. Legally, it's murky. A civil case might argue unjust enrichment, but without a written agreement, it would be an uphill battle. My honest advice, I looked at her, bracing. Consider it a very expensive lesson. Stop all financial support immediately, protect your assets, and decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want moving forward. That night, I wrote the email. It was not emotional, not angry, just clear. I thanked them for the years they had provided stability in my childhood. I listed, line by line, every contribution I had made since the financial support began. More than $165,000 in direct costs, not including time, labor, or emotional energy. I explained that these contributions were made with the understanding that I was building equity in the house, that the public transfer of that asset, without my knowledge or consent, voided that understanding, effective immediately. I would no longer provide financial assistance of any kind. I ended with a simple line: "This is not a request for repayment. It is a decision to stop giving where respect has not been returned." Their reply came 6 hours later. The tone was familiar, not remorseful, defensive. My mother's section dominated the message, alternating between wounded disbelief and maternal guilt. "You've always been so self-sufficient," she wrote. "We didn't think you needed what Lillian needed. And now, when we're at our most vulnerable, you abandon us." My father's part was shorter. "I'm disappointed," he wrote. "This transactional view of family is beneath you. Nowhere, nowhere was there acknowledgement of the harm, of the erasure, of the fact that their home had been paid off with my money, then handed to someone else. They didn't see betrayal. They only saw withdrawal. To them, I had changed. I had become cold, calculating. But the truth was simpler. I had finally drawn a line, and this time, I wasn't crossing back. The silence didn't last. At first, there were only the occasional messages, voicemails from my father, carefully casual. "Hey kiddo, just checking in. Hope work's going well." Then, one day, something new. "Your mother and I have been talking about our living situation. The house feels a little big now, and Lillian and Spencer would like some privacy. Let's catch up soon." I didn't return the call, but I listened to the message twice. It was vague, too vague, no apology, no reference to the fallout. Just an implication wrapped in gentle tones: we might need a place to go. Then came a second message, this time from my mother. "Sweetheart, we're having a small family dinner this Sunday. Just us. We'd love to see you. There are some things we'd like to discuss about the future." I replied by text, "Can't make it. Busy with showings. Hope dinner goes well." That small reply must have opened the door. The messages increased, peppered with phrases like "temporary options," "tight market," and "just until things settle." The subtext was clearer now. They hadn't just given away their home. They hadn't secured a plan for themselves. And now, it seemed, they were circling back, toward mine. The Silverfield Lake House had been my dream long before it became reality. Tucked by a quiet lake in Oregon wine country. It was modest, 3 bedrooms, a small dock, wraparound windows that let in the morning fog. I'd purchased it during a record sales year, after closing 3 high-value properties back-to-back. Every square inch had been chosen carefully: the paint, the furniture, the linens. I rented it out seasonally, but kept weeks blocked off just for myself. It was the one place in the world that felt entirely mine. I had never told them it was off-limits, but I had also never offered. Then, one Tuesday evening, the doorman at my condo called up. "Miss Grant, your parents are here to see you. They don't have an appointment." I hesitated, for a moment. I considered sending them away, but avoiding the inevitable wouldn't change the request I already knew was coming. They arrived bearing a casserole dish and a bottle of wine we'd once shared during a quiet Christmas dinner. I accepted both without comment. We sat at the dining table, where contracts were usually signed, not negotiations with family held. My father cleared his throat. "We wanted to speak to you in person, about the house." "You mean Lillian's house," I said, without malice. He nodded, reluctantly. "They've asked us to move out. It's understandable. They're newlyweds. They need space. We've looked at a few places." My mother added quickly, "But rent is high, and your father's consulting isn't enough for the kind of location we need. With my health..." Her sentence trailed off, unfinished but heavy. My father leaned forward. "We were thinking about the lake house. It's just sitting empty most of the time. Quiet surroundings would be good for your mother. It could really help." He said it like a favor, like he was suggesting something mutually beneficial. I looked at them both, then down at the table. I thought about the weekends I'd spent painting that house myself, about how long I'd saved, planned, sacrificed, about how they hadn't spoken to me in weeks after I'd drawn my boundary. Until now. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That won't be possible." My mother blinked. What do you mean it's not rented now? Is it? That's not the point. It's not available. I'm not offering it. But it's just sitting there, she insisted, confusion giving way to offense. You'd really say no? To your own parents? I didn't flinch. Yes. The word hung in the air. My father's tone sharpened. Madeline, you're being dramatic. We're not asking for anything permanent. Just a few months. No, I said again. Not a few months, not one night. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I stood. You gave away the house I was helping pay for. You used my money, then erased my role. And now, you want access to the one place I've built on my own. That's not going to happen. They left soon after, without the wine. And for the first time in a long time, I slept through the night. Not because things were fixed, but because I had chosen to protect the only home no one else had touched. They reached out again 2 days later, this time by email. The tone was careful, stripped of guilt but heavy with suggestion. Let's meet somewhere neutral, my father wrote. We want to discuss next steps, somewhere quiet, just the three of us. I chose a cafe halfway between my condo and their temporary rental. It was one of those places with high ceilings, exposed brick, and jazz playing low in the background. Not the kind of spot where anyone raised their voice. That was intentional. I arrived early, picked a table near the back, private, but not isolated. I ordered tea, opened my folder, and waited. They came in 10 minutes late. My mother wore her best expression of strained grace, hair perfectly set, makeup flawless, as if appearance alone might soften the conversation. My father looked tired, older than I remembered from just weeks ago. He offered a cautious smile as they sat. Small talk came first. Traffic, weather, a story about a neighbor's dog. I let it happen. Let the silence linger after each remark until they stopped trying. Then I opened the folder and slid it across the table. What's this? My mother asked. Listings, I said. Apartments in your price range, 1-bedrooms and senior communities with good access to transit and medical care. All available immediately, I called to confirm. She pushed it back without opening it. We're not elderly, Madeline. We're just in transition. I understand, I said calmly. But that transition is yours to manage. My father cleared his throat. Look, I know emotions have been high, but this isn't about the past. It's about practicality. We need somewhere safe and stable. I agree. Which is why I suggest you find a space that fits your needs. And your budget. He frowned. You'd really watch your own parents struggle when you have a second home sitting empty. The accusation wasn't new. But this time, it didn't land. I leaned forward. This isn't about a property, it's about a pattern. I supported this family for 5 years. Quietly, fully, without conditions. I paid your mortgage. I kept the lights on. I covered medical bills. And then, without a word, you gave the house to someone else. We already explained that. My mother said sharply. It was for Lillian's future. She needed it. And I didn't. You're stable, she said, almost proudly. You don't need help. That's where you're wrong, I replied. I didn't need money. I needed honesty. I needed respect. I needed to be treated like a daughter, not like a sponsor. The silence that followed was the first honest thing between us in months. I took a breath. Here's where we are. I won't offer you housing. I won't resume financial support. And I won't continue playing the role of problem solver in a family that refuses to take accountability. My father shifted. So that's it. After everything we've done for you, I looked at him. At both of them. If you want a relationship with me moving forward, it will be on new terms. It begins with a real apology, and with actions that show you understand what happened, what it cost. My mother's face hardened. We raised you. We gave you everything we could. I nodded. And I gave back more than you asked. Now I'm asking for something in return recognition. The conversation drifted after that. Back into the safe terrain of weather and groceries, and a vague promise to think about everything. When we stood to leave, there were no hugs, just polite nods and a quiet goodbye. But as I stepped into the fresh air, I felt no regret, because I hadn't closed the door. I had simply built a threshold, and for the first time, they would have to earn their way across it. The weeks after that cafe conversation passed more quietly than I expected. No calls, no emails, No unexpected knocks at my door. Just space. Open and unfamiliar. Like a room I'd never stepped into before. At first, it felt uneasy, like something was missing. But slowly, I realized that missing piece had never belonged to me in the first place. With the silence came clarity. I began pouring myself back into the life I had set aside for so long. Work, once a refuge, became a source of genuine pride again. I picked up a new project, an ambitious historic conversion on the edge of Alberta Heights, transforming an old Victorian estate into boutique condos. It was complex, beautiful, and entirely mine to lead. I threw myself into the floor plans, the staging, the marketing strategy. For the first time in years, I wasn't working to cover someone else's needs. I was building something for myself. Outside of work, I started reclaiming the parts of me I'd pushed aside. I reconnected with friends I had unintentionally distanced. Samantha, of course, but others too. We met for dinners that lasted hours, with no urgent text from family pulling me away. I joined a local book club, enrolled in a weekend pottery class, started going on solo walks without needing an excuse. Even therapy shifted. What began as crisis management turned into something deeper: healing, pattern breaking, clarity. My therapist helped me see what I hadn't dared name before, that the role I played in my family, reliable, responsible, restrained, had shaped everything. The way I stayed silent when hurt, the way I gave without pause, the way I equated usefulness with love. She taught me to ask questions I'd never had the language for. What do I need? What do I want? What do I deserve? And somewhere in the middle of that growth, Jake arrived. It wasn't dramatic. No whirlwind, no sparks flying across a crowded room. We met through a colleague. He was an architectural photographer shooting one of my listings. He was quiet, perceptive, with a dry sense of humor and a camera always slung casually across his chest. We talked about floor plans and window light, then about books and coffee, and where we went when we needed to breathe. He listened, not just to my words, but to the spaces between them. When I told him, early on, that my family life was complicated, he didn't ask for the details. He just nodded and said, "Mine is too," and that was enough. We moved slowly. Sunday mornings at the farmer's market, quiet dinners, a shared fondness for local bookstores and overwatered houseplants. For the first time, I was with someone who didn't need me to fix anything. Someone who didn't make me feel like I had to earn my place at the table. And that, more than anything, felt new. The lake house, once seen only as an investment property, became something else entirely. I added a small home office, swapped out the rental furniture for pieces that reflected who I was becoming, not just what would photograph well. On quiet weekends, Jake would join me there, camera in hand, barefoot on the dock at sunrise. We didn't need to say much. The world slowed down, and in that stillness, I began to bloom, not into someone new, but into someone I'd always been, beneath the obligations, beneath the careful silence, beneath the role I'd been asked to play. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living. By the time autumn settled over Portland, soft rains, yellowing trees, steam curling up from coffee cups, things had quieted in my own life, but not in theirs. The first signs were small. Melissa's social media, once a curated stream of brunches, yoga retreats, and home renovation triumphs, grew quieter. A caption that read "Growth isn't always comfortable" beneath a dim photo of their kitchen. A post about weathering storms as a couple, paired with a black and white photo of their wedding bands on a windowsill. Then came word from a mutual acquaintance. A charity dinner. Overheard voices, raised tones behind closed doors. Spencer's name had surfaced in a local business article. An ongoing investigation into improper financial practices at his family's dealership chain. No formal charges yet, but enough to send tremors through their supposedly stable foundation. The house on Hawthorne Lane, the one that had once been the epicenter of my own heartbreak, began showing signs of neglect. On a whim, I drove past one afternoon, curiosity outweighing caution. The shutters were chipped. The garden, once lovingly tended by my mother, had overgrown into tangled vines and wilting beds. A gutter hung loose at the side, swaying with the breeze. The paint around the front windows was beginning to peel. It was still the same house, but now, it looked tired, forgotten, and somehow, for the first time, I didn't feel anger, only clarity. My father and I had kept up our cautious monthly lunches, held at neutral spots, conversations light but slowly deepening. He had grown more open, more reflective, even vulnerable. During one of these visits, he mentioned Melissa and Spencer in a different tone. "They're struggling," he said. "Not bitter, not defensive, just tired. Spencer's family isn't offering support anymore. Not with the legal stuff going on. Contractors are calling, bills piling up." I said nothing. He stirred his coffee. "Your mother's starting to see things. That maybe we didn't think through everything the way we should have." I looked at him. "Did she say that?" "Not directly," he admitted. "But she's quieter now, and she asked for your number again. Not to argue, just to talk." I received the call that evening. Her voice was softer than I remembered, less controlled. "Madeline," she began, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say something." I didn't interrupt. I convinced myself that everything I did was for the good of the family, that giving Melissa the house would secure her future, and that you, because you're so capable, would be fine no matter what. Her breath caught. But I see now that I was protecting an image, not a family, and it cost me more than I ever imagined. I didn't speak. I wanted to give her room. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Not just for what happened with the house, but for all of it, for the years of imbalance, for making you feel invisible while praising your silence." The pause that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy with something real. "I want to do better," she continued. "Not to undo the past. I know I can't, but to understand it. Would you consider going to family therapy with us, just a few sessions? I'm willing to listen. I mean that now." And for the first time in my adult life, I believed her, not because the words were perfect, or the apology was overdue, but because for once, she wasn't trying to save face, she was trying to rebuild something, and this time, she wasn't asking me to carry it for her. I didn't give an answer that night. I told her I'd think about it, but when I hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. The house had fallen out of their hands. The picture-perfect marriage was crumbling. The roles they had crafted so carefully no longer held shape. And maybe, in the rubble, we could begin again, not as a family defined by performance, but as people trying, finally, to be honest. Not perfect, but honest. We began therapy in late November, not with promises of healing or illusions of easy resolution, but with silence, long pauses, and sentences that stopped midway. My father showed up with notes. My mother brought a tightly clasped purse and a guarded expression. I brought boundaries. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. In that small, windowed office on the west side of Portland, we began unlearning what we'd spent decades performing. My father, to his credit, was consistent, reflective, willing to sit in discomfort. He didn't just listen, he stayed. My mother took longer. Her voice often rose in defense before retreating into guilt. But slowly, something shifted. She stopped justifying, started asking, and once, unexpectedly, she cried, not from shame, but understanding. Progress came in inches, but it came. Outside those walls, I was building something new. In February, I closed on a home in Alberta Heights, a 3-bedroom craftsman with warm oak floors and a sunlit reading nook. I renovated it carefully, not for resale, not for staging, but for permanence. Every detail reflected a choice that was mine: the paint, the light fixtures, the quiet garden out back, the lake house transformed, too. No longer a rental with neutral decor. It became a refuge. I added a small studio, stocked the shelves with books and blank journals. Jake and I spent long weekends there, walking the shore, cooking slowly, leaving our phones off until Monday. It wasn't an escape, it was a return, to self, to quiet, to something true. My relationship with my father deepened. Our lunches became steady, grounded. We talked less about what happened, more about who we were becoming. He spoke of therapy like it was something sacred, and in his eyes, I saw something new, Not expectation, not apology, just respect. With my mother, it remained slower. Some conversations still edged too close to old wounds. But there were moments, brief, unforced, when I saw her trying not to protect her image, but to repair connection, and I gave her space to try. I no longer needed her approval. I wasn't a child hoping to be seen. I was a woman who had built a life from the ground up, one defined not by obligation, but by intention. And that, I realized, was family, not the one you're born into, not the roles you're assigned, but the one you choose to shape, with clarity, with courage, and with enough softness to forgive, even if you never forget. I had stopped waiting to be invited in. I had made a home no one could take from me. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: family isn't about who you sacrifice for the most. It's about who sees you clearly, values you equally, and chooses to grow with you, not just lean on you. I spent years giving without question, hoping that love would be returned through recognition. But real love doesn't require you to disappear in order to belong. Today, I live in a home I built with my own hands, on my own terms. I'm no longer waiting to be chosen. I've already chosen myself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to walk away from family in order to protect your peace, let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your voice, setting boundaries, and redefining what family really means. Because sometimes, the truest kind of home